So by now you're getting the picture that there's lots of difficulties for people in accessing the NDIS, and that's really disadvantaging particular groups. One such group are people with mental health issues. Okay, so we know that there's around 700,000 people in Australia with severe mental health issues, but not all of them are gaining access to the NDIS. For many people, they're ineligible for the NDIS funding because they might not have a permanent disability in some cases, or it might not be deemed that their life is impacted significantly for that in relation to that disability. It will only support in the rollout for 2019-2020 64,000 people with primary psychosocial disability. So we can see the very difference between this figure here, 690 and 64,000. So quite short there. So that would mean 91% of the population with severe mental illness will have to rely on mental health services that are not provided by the National Disability Insurance Scheme. We simply don't have those services. We don't, the community and the health service don't have that many services. So it means many people will be without that support. We can also have a look at the case of ME or chronic fatigue syndrome, either one of them. Sometimes they're used interchangeably. This is a neuroimmune condition, so it can affect the gut, the brain, the immune system, the endocrine and the cardiac systems, I suppose. So it's been around for a long time. Actually, people think it's a new kind of illness, but it's actually around for a long time. It can be really disabling for people, this illness. So it might mean that you can't participate in work or education, because you're just too sick. You've got to stay home. You can't go out a lot of the time. You can lose contact with friends, very difficult to make friends, and you could be bedbound for months or even years, if not housebound. So it's a really difficult condition for many people to be living with, but they're not necessarily considered eligible for the NDIS. It's hard to prove that it's a disability. There are generic assessment tools that are used for us to ascertain and assess disability, but the problem is they're not all applicable across different populations or different groups. So not all diseases, mental, neurological, addictive disorders will be covered by these tools. They are applicable to very general populations, but when we've got intersection and all kind of issues, we can see that that's a bit of a problem. Think about the diversity of individuals who might experience disability and whether they're going to be sort of covered by all these ideas here. Chances are not much. We can break this down further, this assessment process, by actually looking at the domains within it. So they'll be assessing your cognition. Can you communicate, your thinking, concentrating, problem solving, those sorts of things, but also mobility. So can people get up and around? Can they walk a long distance? So for some people will have a disability where they have mobility sometimes, but not others. So sometimes you might need help with your self-care and not other times. We might see how people are getting along socially. So how do they get along with other people? People like family members, spouses, or people total strangers. So we're looking at those interactions in the assessment process often as well. We might also look at people's day-to-day life, day-to-day activities. What can they do most days? Can they go to work? Can they go to school? And then participation. So you know, in all sorts of aspects of life, I suppose. And we're looking at the factors that are affected by the health condition that person is experiencing and how that relates to this area. Now, let's have a read of this here. My entry into the NDIS started with a phone call in May 2016. She said I had to do a screening assessment. She would guide me through the questionnaire about my disability that would take an hour, so it's quite a long time. I questioned the need for this when reams of current information about me were readily available by my Victorian department file. Everyone, she said, has to do the questionnaire to get on the NDIS. Assessments are depressing, especially unnecessarily ones. I spend all my energy focusing on what I can do, and suddenly I'm called to define my deficits. It brings to mind the young male physio who assessed my spine. I thought I was looking rather fit in my bathers. He took one look at me and casually said, "Yep, the scoliosis sticks out like dog's balls." But it was the NDIS and I cooperated because I wanted it to work. Nicole read out the questions one after the other. Can you stand? Can you communicate? Can you feed yourself? Is there anything you couldn't do in the last 2 weeks? How would you rate the quality of your life? The questions went on and on. Several times I asked her the purpose of the question or its context. I'm just reading them out. Everybody gets the same questions. At the end of the interview, I asked her for a copy. She said, "No, that's not possible. As a government agency," I said, "under information privacy laws, you're required to give me access to my answers as recorded on the form." "I'll consult my manager," she said. Later, she told me again it wasn't possible. What I want you now to do as you're looking at this is to reflect on this. What stands out for you? Do you think this is fair? Do you think it's good? Do you think it's okay? Write down your responses. Let's read the follow-up about what happened to this woman in her dealings with the NDIS. After 6 months without a word, the NDIS officer called Deirdre rang. She said the results from my screening assessment concluded that my disability needs were minimal. However, she checked my medical and disability information on the file and realised this conclusion was wrong. Deirdre told me I would have to repeat parts of the screening assessment. I answered into my query. She explained other participants also had to do this because the initial assessors did not have the training to properly interpret the questions. She revisited the questions from the screening assessment. "You said you had no difficulties managing all household responsibilities," she said. "Is that correct?" What the question really meant was, can you actually physically do the housework yourself? "No," I said, "I mainly supervise." She said, "Oh, okay, that's what I thought. It wasn't properly interpreted for you. I will change the answer." She went on. "According to the earlier assessment," she said, "you have no difficulty socialising. How often do you go out socially?" "Maybe once in 4 weeks," I answered, feeling ashamed. "Why don't you go out more often?" she asked. I said, "I'm often sore from sitting or too tired from work. It's difficult to organise, and friends' houses, transport in many places aren't accessible." I felt even worse. "Right, I'll change that answer too," she said. I told her I must have thought it at the initial interview that the question was about my social skills. The next question was about personal hygiene. "In the earlier assessment, you said you had no difficulties managing your hygiene," she said. But she had the chance to start interpreting the question. I blurted out, "I know you're going to say that that question is about whether I could shower myself." I must have thought she was asking me if I was dirty. I started laughing, and then I tried to stop. More sniggers erupted. Deirdre waited patiently. She seemed like a nice woman trying hard to do a good job. Perhaps if we had met face to face, she would have seen the joke too. We continued through the questions. At the end, we added up the new scores. Before, you got 55 out of 100, or minimal needs. Now you have 88.8, complex needs. What I want you to do as students is to think about, what have you learned from hearing that story? What could we do to help people navigate through that process? What would you do if you were the person asking those questions?